All right, off to the hologram. So don't get the sheets yet. I'll have them printed. You can copy this down later. March 13th, this one will be due, so that's a week from Wednesday. There will be overlap just like before. So as we're finishing this one up, we're starting the other one. You'll find, just like I said before, if you do your artwork outside of class and you dedicate your time in class to actually like animating the stuff, this goes a lot quicker, okay? If you come to class and you spend the entire time doing your artwork, then that leaves little time for After Effects here. And that's really the part that most of you are going to struggle with anyway, is the After Effects, because that's what you're learning. Our goal is to build a hologram inside of Illustrator and then animate it in 3D, that should be in quotation marks, in After Effects. We talked about this before. After Effects doesn't have actual 3D, it's 2.5D, but we're just going to put 3D for this. Animating the hologram to have 2D and 3D motion, okay? So these aren't going to be, and this is one of the things that people typically get dinged on, it's not going to be just taking your hologram and saying, here it is with all this moving stuff. I actually want to see things like moving in 3D, okay? So and sometimes you'll have an element that might, here's my hologram, it might flip down and open up, okay? Or it might flip this way and open up, or it might come out and turn, right? I want to see some element of 3D there, because this 3D leads into the parallax assignment, which is mostly 3D, okay? So this is our introduction to it. There should be some complexity to the hologram. These should not be static. I didn't mention it before, I don't think. Maybe I did. Hologram. Every time. What's his name? I build my holograms so that they look really fancy, but nothing you would ever want to actually interact with in the real world, okay? He builds these things because he wants this level of complexity to it. If you've seen Ender's Game, it makes complete sense because that kid is like a super genius. But in the same sense, having these little bits of detail all over help make it feel more complete. There we go. Quicker. So you can see, here's his hologram. All of this stuff, all these elements kind of wrapping around, that's the hologram. All these little pieces, that's little animations, these little things. You have to get away from the utilitarian, right? Like what are the essence? What is the only things that I need here, and that's the only things I want to put in. We have to start building the utilitarian, this is what I need, and then the aesthetic, what's going to look good, and then pairing those two things together to make it look really fun and interesting. Like, look at all that level of complexity that goes into this. Okay, all of these lines here, all these numbers here. Here's some numbers, some red lines. There's some tabs right there. More things here, more things here, more things here. Okay, and then there's actually like the video of the kid doing the stuff. And now consider too, like when they're doing this kind of stuff, like it's easier to talk about this in 2D because in 2D it doesn't take very long to do a lot of this. Some of those things you'll see, it's like just After Effects, a couple circles, and he's animating this thing and it goes away. If this was 3D, he might spend like a week building something that would only be on screen for a minute. But you'll see more of that. Is his name in here? Ash Thorpe, there it is. You think I'd be able to remember that, right? It's such a unique name. But he is like one of the top like designers for pretty much anything. He has really cool stuff. Here's some of his interface stuff. Call of Duty, Infinite Warfare. Now you don't know what you don't know. That's why you have to go out there and you have to look at these things and get ideas and see what other people are doing and plan for this. Getting the idea of using a hexagon, for those things is like somebody came up with that idea and now people are replicating that thing. Having these outlines versus the whole shape versus both shapes. Having this kind of depth that goes into it, all of these little designs, having this symmetrical, almost kaleidoscope effect on this hologram. Okay, now look at all the stuff that's happening inside here and all the work that must have gone into literally 3 seconds of his animation. Your animations don't turn out good by luck, they turn out good by lots of hard work. That's the only way they get to this point. There's no shortcuts, there's no cheats, there's no magic buttons inside of After Effects. It's just lots of hard work. It's lots of staying up late, screwing around in Illustrator and After Effects, and doing these things over and over and over again to make it work. And one of the things that I've found over my years is that you just do it. If you want to get to this level, you just do it. That's the only way to get there. Here's some more stuff for Amazing Spider-Man. He's actually getting into 3D more now. He was just doing Illustrator stuff, but he's starting to use 2D. Person of Interest, title sequence. Here's Ender's Game. Here's Iron Man stuff. Ender's Game screen graphics. Okay, so look at all those different things and see how you can create these really cool effects. Many things should be animated and cycled, okay? Meaning that I don't want to see a bunch of static screens. I don't want, here's my interface, and then it goes like this, and now it's 3D. Again, push yourself to that level. At this point in the class, that's what I'm going to be looking for. All those beginner things of setting keyframes, we're done with. You know how to do it. You're still doing it. You're still using motion graphs. You're still using, or the speed graph. You're still using motion blur. All those things are done. You know how to do those. You should be experts at it by now. So we should be at the point of, okay, now that we understand how to set keyframes, let's set them all over the place in a cool, fun way that doesn't make people go too crazy. Using Easy Ease, Graph Editor, and colors appropriately, finishing touches, motion blur. It sounds simple here, but you want them to be complex, okay? It's very loose in this area. Your turn-ins will be your artwork, so you'll be turning in your Illustrator drawings, obviously. Your movie, and then hologram looks, you have 2 and 3D. 960 by 540, 30 frames a second, it's worth 8 points. Okay, and make sure you obviously put your name on your stuff. Cool. So that's in the book. You can grab it from there. Let me open up my interface. All right, so here's the interface that I said I was going to start using. These can also be not the only thing that we use, right? So even though this is my base design, I can layer stuff on top of this to make it look more fancy, more complex, more technological, okay? The idea with this is that I have a starting point. As an artist, we hate the blank screen, we hate the blank canvas, we want to have something to go with. If we have something like this, at least we have a starting point. I can do my base stuff and say, okay, now that I have that done, what else could I add to make this look funner, right? More interesting. So all of my stuff here is on layers. Every single thing that I want to be able to animate separately is on a separate layer. So my play area, this is a mask that I created. I didn't have that initially, but I created this play area mask that I can use for my video, so that was just an extra thing I had to add. Here's my play line, so that's that little bar at the bottom that will move across. There's my title box, so I'll have a piece of text inside there. Here's the top of the video. So that stuff that's in that layer is stuff that will be basically placed on top of the video to make it feel like my hologram, my video, and then this other layer is all layered on top of it. It makes things feel more interweaved, and it makes it feel like it's more complete. If I just slapped a video on top of it and it didn't have like cut corners or anything, it wouldn't feel correct. It wouldn't feel right, right? So I added that. Here's the UI background. So here's just this piece. If I decide to break any of these off, I can break those off later if I need to. Here's my round dial. Here is my control tab. Here is my dial background. Here's my playlist. Oops, can't see it. There's my playlist. There's my playlist background. There's the tab. Same thing here. Okay? So those are all the elements that I want to be able to animate or move separately or modify separately. So they're all on individual pieces. I'm going to make sure everything fits within my document, right? So I don't have anything sticking outside in the artboard. It won't bring in, okay? So make sure it's all within that white area. If you need to scale it down, do that. Everything is also labeled, so I don't have to worry about messing with that. I do want to take my control tabs and just make sure they're below it. That's not going to hurt anything. Playlist, nope, round tab. There it is. I just want it to be behind it. Cool. All right, so then I'm going to take this and I'm just going to go to Save As. I already made my hologram artwork folder. I'm not going to go through that. We've done it for several assignments. I've copied my original one, renamed it, whatever. UI ready to import. As a warning, if you label stuff UI 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, After Effects sometimes recognizes that not as individual files, but as a movie, okay? And so you don't want to label stuff 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 if you're going to bring it into After Effects. The one you're bringing in, give it a definite name, UI ready to import, okay? It's going into my artwork folder. There it goes. Make sure this create PDF compatible file is on. Typically it is on. Sometimes people click it off for some reason and then it won't import into After Effects, so make sure you have that. And again, something people sometimes do is they change it to CMYK. After Effects only takes RGB, okay? Again, something people do, but you shouldn't need to worry about that unless you're messing with stuff. You can change your color mode right there. All right. So now I'm going to open up my project here. Nope, that's that. Hologram. There we go. All right, so there's nothing inside here right now. Import my file. D drive. Ready to import. This is where if you did have 1, 2, 3, this would be checked. It would automatically check if it recognized a sequence of images. Make sure it's unchecked if you obviously don't want that. Same settings as before, composition, retain layer size. And then import. And here we go. If I double click this, I should get a composition that's 960 by 540 because that's what I set up inside of Illustrator. It should be 30 frames a second because that's my default in After Effects. If any of those things aren't there, I would go to my comp settings and I would verify that I do have 30 frames a second, 960 by 540. I noticed now that we're doing some of the later assignments, some people are forgetting about that and they're doing these 1920 resolution things, which makes your work a lot harder, okay? Because you got to scale stuff back down. The duration doesn't matter. I don't care about that as long as it's long enough for me to play with. All right, so here's my document. Now, I know that I'm going to be importing in just these dials separately. These are just placeholders, so I'm not too concerned about that at the moment. My first goal is to start connecting things that should go together. So my first job is to go through, let's say, my levels here. All 3 of these layers, so I have my background, my level sliders, and I have my levels tab. All 3 of those are going to be in a separate composition. I'm going to Control-Shift C those, there we go, and I'm going to say levels. I'm going to not put the capital V. Move all my attributes, okay. Okay, so there's my levels. That's all on the one thing. My playlist, same thing. I'll pre-compose that, playlist. My dial on the side here, dial. All right, that works. Let's see, what else do we have? I have my top of video, which is that stuff, my title box, my play line, and my play area. Let's start organizing. So I'm just going to take these and put these into my comps. I'm going to take this, put that into comps, take this, put that into artwork. All right, so I'm going to bring in a video just so I have something to kind of go with. So I know, like, this is what it's going to be looking like. I have an idea. I will go to here. I will go to 2560. I will go to game controller, image sequence, game renders. There we go. So this is something from another class. You could bring in a MP4, MOV, an AVI, pretty much any movie. If you're using a movie, you might be using an audio file, and you may want to have an audio file. It's the same process. So I have a sequence. The button's clicked. I hit OK. And then I'm just going to drag this down into this work area. And I have actually on here, oops, too far. Actually, I don't want that movie. Let me find a better movie. I'll grab something from this class. 1900 AM, page transitions, movies. What? I didn't print anything out. There we go. Where'd all my stuff go? PM? No. Just everything's gone. All right, fine. Just this should be good. Do I have anything in my folder at all? All right. I'll just do this. Corner pin tracking. There we go. All right, so this is a video I use for something else. Fine. I'll drag this down. There we go. It's way too big. I'm going to scale this down. Place it over where I want that to play. And this is where that play area came in. So initially when I did this, I'm like, all right, I should be able to just kind of stack it and then crop it and cut it. And I'm like, no, I'm just going to do it all in Illustrator. So that's where I drew this play area. So now I have a mask. So I just drew a mask inside there. So I have a clean area that cuts out. So if I drop this below the play area, I go to my switches, I do an alpha matte, there it is. So now the video is perfectly cut to that area, and then I can just take my top of video stuff, which is here, and drag it above the video. So now you see that feels more complete. It feels more like it's in there. And as I hit play, there's all my stuff moving around. Beautiful. All right, so let's do some basic stuff. So one of the things that we can do is we can obviously set keyframes. It starts here, it ends there. Perfectly acceptable to do. I do want to see some of these not being just keyframes. I want to see some of these pieces actually being expressions or randomizations or that kind of thing. I don't want everything to be just like the same static-y type stuff. So I'm going to start off with just animating this thing going across, okay? So let's say that I start it here at, I'm going to say 5. I click on my position, I scoot up to, let's say, 20, and then I just scoot that across. All right, and then I'm just going to move my video actually so it's lined up with this. So it's, let's see, it starts here, and it's going to end right when that one ends. All right, so now that we've known a little bit about keyframes, what should I do to these keyframes next? No. Why would I have easy ease on this? I can put motion blur, right, but nothing. In this case, we don't need to do anything else except for motion blur on these keys. So now we're getting to the point where we know what easy ease does, we know what speed graph does. Now we have to decide whether we should have it. If I put it on here, that means that my play tick is going to like slowly pick up speed and then start going fast. It wouldn't. It would just go the same speed pretty much throughout. Okay, that was a trick question. Cool. So there we go. So now when I hit play, you'll see that that little ticker is going across. Now for something like that, this is where we have to again be kind of particular about what we do or what we put on things. So if I put motion blur on this and I click on motion blur, do we see anything happening here? Right, nothing. So this instance, that item doesn't need motion blur, okay? Now let's say I come back, I have a big animation of something, or I have a fast moving there. Maybe I do want to put motion blur on that, okay? So you should have motion blur on your piece, but it doesn't necessarily mean every single item has to have motion blur. It means the appropriate items will have motion blur. You will have to decide what should have motion blur, what shouldn't, okay? And typically for a beginner, the best way, put it on there, see if it looks good. If not, take it off. Cool. So that's one way that we could animate this thing sliding across. Here's another way. I'm going to go to my position. Let me just eyeball the other one off so it's gone. No movement at the current time. I'm going to right-click on this and separate my dimensions. Okay. So basically, what I want to do is animate just one of these, and I want it to be an automatic function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to alt-click on the X position, and I'm just going to type in what number I want this to equal, okay? So right now, its x position is 322. If I put in, let's say 500, it'll just jump to 500, and that's what it'll be, okay? So what I want to do is put in a number or a expression that will automatically move it throughout time, right? So if I type in time, and I turn this off, you'll see that it jumps to 0, because what is my time? 0, right? And as I hit play, what is the x position here? Still 0, okay? Let me fast forward 15, there we go. So what is this now? 15, right? So we have our time is linked exactly to this. So when our time is 15, this is 15. What was our number before? Our x position before I did it? Before that, 300 and some, right? Let's go back and do that. So 322. So I'm going to just drag this over, and I'm slowing it down so we can break it through. Typically, when you're doing this for realsies, it doesn't go this slow, okay? So this is, the range is about 285, and the end of this is 621, okay? So that's my range. And I like to open up WordPad because I have a short memory, 285. See, I already forgot 621, there we go. So let's say that I alt-clicked on this again. Let's say I took my time value and I multiplied it by 300. Okay, and then I hit play. Oops, there it goes, just left. There it goes. Too far, too fast. Let's say I did time times 10 plus 285. There we go. So this is what I typed in just so you can see it. Time times 10 plus 285. Now, everyone hates math, right? You guys suck. These are basic things, okay? So all we're relating to, or all we're trying to connect, is just numbers. That's all we're looking at here. So if you can basically just, in your head or on a piece of paper, figure out the kind of numbers you want, it's very easy to go backwards and get those numbers out of this, okay? So if I do time times 10, oops, that's and again. Okay, and let's pretend for this instance that time is 5 seconds. So what will it equal? Good one. All right, so 50. Now 50 is way over here on my timeline. I can't have it way over here. So how do I get it back onto that area? How do I get it back into this range right here? I just add one of the numbers, 285. And what that does is it sets 285 as my new start point. So when time is 0, 0 times 10 is 0, plus 285, that's where we're starting, okay? Now, obviously we might hit a certain spot where this doesn't work. I don't know what that would be. Let's say my time is 30 seconds, which might be too long. I don't think my video even goes that far. 30 times that is 300, plus 285 equals 585, right? So we're still within that range, okay? So this expression of time times 10 plus 285 basically allows this to automatically play. And you'll see I go past 30 seconds and I'm still within that range. Now what's cool about that is I didn't set any keyframes. Let's say that I needed this to go slower. If I have keyframes, what do? Move my keyframes or adjust my keyframes, right? I spread this out or I bring them closer together, right? With this one, all I would do is just change that 10 number. So let's say time times 3. And then I hit play. So now it's going to go basically 3 times as slow. Okay, so when I get to the end of this, it's gone that far. If I do it time times 2, it's going to go even slower. If I want this to go faster, I just make it bigger than 10. Now if I go too far, obviously it's going to break. Like, that's where it should stop, and it just keeps going. Okay, so obviously there's a good range that's inside there. All right, so this is just an idea of where we could use an expression versus just using keyframes. All right, so that's one instance. Now let's go into some of these other areas and see what else we can do. I'm not going to get into the joining all these things together yet. I just want to go over some of the animating individual pieces. So let's go to our levels here. There's lots of opportunity in this area to do exactly that, to animate each of these pieces individually. I'm going to jump back to Illustrator. I'm going to grab one of my levels groups. Let me hide everything except for my levels. And I'm just going to take one of these, ungroup this, yes, there we go. And I'm just going to bring this into a new document. Oops. Artboard, advanced, where are you at? Under properties. Show video save, crosshair, center mark. Okay. And under view, I go to hide, transparency grid. Now we can see it. All right. So I'm going to start separating this into pieces. Okay. This is an element I will bring in separately. So I need to have all of these pieces on a separate area. So this here will go onto a new layer. So I'll just drag this to a new layer and call this levels slider. Turn it off. Make sure I've ungrouped everything. Sometimes stuff is just always grouped. It might be easier to go in here and try to find that piece. Yep, there it is. I'm going to grab this rectangle, make a new layer, put it on here, outline. Okay, turn that off. And then I have all these lines here that are just on a separate layer. Oops. All right, so the idea with this is that I would have, I'm going to make another solid just so we can see it happen on a solid. Give this a color. And Illustrator is, we should be at least somewhat comfortable with Illustrator. Anything we're going to do in After Effects, plan it out in Illustrator. You're more comfortable with it, try it out, see how you would animate it, and then that should translate right into After Effects. So the way that I want this set up is like that. Okay, so I have my solid underneath. This thing will animate upwards and then kind of come back down. Okay, I will need a mask for this. So this solid outline here isn't a solid. There's no coloration to it. So I'm actually going to copy this, make a new layer, paste it. Oops. Paste it in layer 5, and then just swap the coloring here. Okay, that way I have basically a mask that I can use for this red. Because I need to make sure that as it gets to the top that it's not like sticking out, because that would look weird. I want to have an exact spot, a track matte or an alpha matte that I could use to cut that out. Okay, layer 4 is not needed. I can create that inside of After Effects. And I will give this a different color just so I don't confuse myself. There we go. All right, so there's all my levels mask. Okay, now I know I'm going to bring in other stuff too, so why not just put everything in one piece? Let's turn everything back on. Nothing here is happening. Okay, so over here, same thing with these. Each one of these pieces is going to be animated separately. I want to bring each one in separately and then just duplicate it. So I'm going to copy this. I'll go into my new document. I'll make a new layer. I'll paste it. I'll ungroup it. And then just delete the stuff that I don't need. Okay. If I decide that I wanted to tweak some of the stuff, like let's say I decided, oh, I want to round the corners, I can still do that. That's not a big deal. If I change the shape drastically, I do have to go back in the other one and make sure it all fits. So that seems to be good there. Actually, I think I might want to go to my properties here, go to my stroke, go to, nope, not go to stroke. Align, shape, style. No. That's what I want. Where are you at? Fan shape, align, grid, whatever. All right, I guess I'm just going to keep this round like this. I was going to go square it off. I can always do that later. So same thing. I have to think about, do I have a background to this? Probably have a background. Probably need a mask for the shape, and probably need a stroke on top of it. So I'm going to break it down just like I did the other one. Copy it, make a new layer, paste it. This one will just be the stroke. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. There we go. So this will be playlist outline. And this one will be playlist BG color, and it will not have a stroke on that. I'll put these by themselves, and there we go. All right, so now I have these as a separate item. I can do what I want with that. I don't see any issues there. Cool. Separate, yes, okay. So now I'm just gonna save this. I could add more to it if I need to. UI pieces. Make sure it's Adobe compatible, PDF compatible, and then go back to After Effects and then import that. P drive there. Oops. Let's click too fast. UI pieces and composition retain layer size. Then I double click, and then you'll see we get those elements here. Now all I'm doing is just going into this one and just copying these, and then finding the levels comp and then pasting it in here. And then I can just slide this over and line it up. There we go. Okay. Now for the time being, I don't need the other levels. I just need to get that one in place. I can do my work and then duplicate that whole setup over and over again. Let's go into this specific one and set it up. So I'm going to go to the level slider here. And this is something that if you've played with an audio machine before, typically like you would just move these up or move these down. These aren't something that would go like bouncing up and down. Okay, so these are pretty standard like static type things. So this, I'll just come back and animate that afterwards. I do need a shape that I could have maybe the levels moving around inside here. So I'm going to go to my rectangle tool, I'll click off, and then I'll just create a basic shape down there. I don't need a stroke on this. All I need is a filled color, and for now I'll go with that. Okay. How would I animate this in is up to me. If I just do position, that's definitely something I can do. Coming out, going back in, coming out, going back in. What's another thing I could do for this? Another property though. Scale, right? So we can scale it up and down, but expressions is how we could do that. If we did something like this and we did an expression or a manual keyframe, in order to get it to go up and down, it would be like crazy long, especially with how many keyframes we would need on that. So if we do scale, make sure I have my pivot in the right spot. Regardless, make sure your pivot's in the right spot. So I'm going to put this pivot right at the very bottom of this. I'm going to test it out, so I'm going to go to my scale properties. Do I need X and Y? No. Which one do I need? Y. This one isn't letting me separate the dimensions, so it's just not going to let us do that. Okay. One thing we can do. Do I want to do that? No, I don't want to do that yet. Okay. I don't want to get too far ahead. Oops, let me unlock my chain here. Make sure. Nope, still no. There we go. So this is what I would have to do is animate this thing scaling up like that. My pivot's still a little bit off. Let me fix the pivot because that might drive me crazy later. Okay, before I set any keyframes or expressions, I make sure that's good. There we go. All right, so let me put this in the correct order. So this should be below lines and above mask. There we go. All right. So now let's do an expression. Now this is going to be a bit more complex than the other one because it's not letting us separate those two dimensions, okay? So when I alt-click on scale and I make this, there we go, make this bigger, it just says transform.scale. That's like what it puts in there. All right, so let me go here, transform.scale. That's what it defaults in there. And basically all it's saying is the scale is going to equal what the scale currently equals. Okay, so that's currently where it's at. So what we want to do is we need to break this up into two different pieces. So if I use this pick whip here, this pick whip allows me to grab any one of these numbers. Okay, so I'm just going to grab either one, it doesn't matter, and then that will change my expression. That's what it said before. This is what it says now. So you don't have to be an expert at expressions or programming or any of this stuff. We just have to know nuts and bolts what they do. This right here is a variable. It's basically, if you've ever done any kind of programming, you've typically used these before. It's basically just a temporary storage area, okay? I have a number, I want to store it here, so that's where it goes temporarily. Here's that same transform.scale, but the difference here is we have this little bracket, a 0, and another bracket. Anyone had programming know what the brackets are for? What's that? Nope, good guess. It's for different values, right? So transform scale has how many values in it? 2, right, x and y. So this says to grab the first one. It's called an array. In arrays, 0 is always the starting number, okay? So what would 0 be in this if we're looking at these two numbers? Which number is it referring to? X, the first number, right? So how would I get to y? Change that to 1. Okay, so x is the first number, which is 0. Typically that's what confuses people. The next number is y, which would be 1. And if we had z, then we'd be able to access that with 2, okay? We don't. So it's just 0 and 1. So right now we're saying that this temporary number is going to equal the x scale. That's all it says, okay? I'm going to rename this. You can type in pretty much any name as long as After Effects hasn't reserved that name. So in the last one, I used the word time to control how that thing moved. Time is a reserved word. I can't use the word time. It'll give us errors. So I'm just going to put val x, okay? Any coding you ever do is case sensitive. So the exact casing, the exact spelling has to be there every time. Usually that's where people have their mistakes. Okay, so if I do this, val x equals that, val y equals transform.scale bracket 1 bracket. Okay, and every line ends with a semicolon. There we go. Okay, so I'm saying store whatever x is here, store whatever y is here, and then let's put those two into these numbers here. Okay, so x equals this, y equals that, and then this actually assigns it. So I'm just going to copy and paste that. Okay, so no animation currently. All we've done is just told it whatever your numbers were, that's what your numbers are. If I change these, it'll change what the expressions are, okay? Now this is where we get into the fun, because I can take this and change that to whatever I want, and now that y value can become random. It can move around. If I jump to here, After Effects, expressions, there's a bunch of expressions that are out there. One of them is wiggle. We'll use that. We talked about that when we had those text animators and some of the other stuff. Here's different ones here. You can kind of look through and get an idea, okay? The other area you can see stuff is this little drop-down list. This is an arrow that allows you to click and see different expressions that are available, and then typically what I do is I'll look those things up if I need to. So like for random numbers, which is what we want, we may go into here and just grab a random number. And basically what it'll do is it'll generate some random number, and it'll just assign it to y, okay? So just as a, for instance, let's just do random, and we'll just put that. 400. So this will give us a random number between 0 and 400. Okay, so now if we zoom out a little bit and we hit play, that's what we get. Okay, now what's happening is every single frame is giving us a random number. So frame 1, it might be 400. Frame 2, it might be 12. Frame 3, it might be 18. Frame 4, it might be 250. Okay, so this doesn't typically work for something like this because it's all over the place. Now where we can use something like this is wiggle. Okay, and wiggle has two properties. It's pretty simple to use. We just have to know the number of times per second, and then we have to know the amount. Okay, so that's what wiggle wants. So you say wiggle parenthesis, how many times per second do you want a new number, and then how big of a number are you looking for. Okay, so in this case, let's say we want a new number 2 times a second. I got rid of my parenthesis. 2 times a second. And then how much movement do we want here? Let's say 100. Okay, so what this does is it generates a new number every 2 seconds, or twice a second, and then it just moves to that number. So we will get this kind of like fluid motion instead of this like crazy jumping motion. So I'll copy this. I will paste that there. I will get an error message, and my error message is because I did not put a semicolon at the end of that one. I lied. Why am I getting an error? That shouldn't matter. Wiggle 200. Oh, sorry. Yep. Forgot this. Wiggle is an array, meaning that there's several different variables stored inside it. So I just have to access the first number, which is 0. Again, that will confuse you, but just deal with it. There we go. All right, so now if I hit play, we get this. Now that's definitely better than it was before, also considering the fact that it was just loading up. Okay, so there it goes. And so now we're getting this kind of like motion. We're just moving up and down kind of randomly. And again, this is, if I were to have set keyframes on that, imagine how many keyframes I would have to get in there to move this thing around like this. It would be a ridiculous amount of keyframes, okay? Let's say I had 100 keyframes there. I need to then change the speed of it. I'm wiping away 100 keyframes, going back and resetting 100 keyframes. With this, how do I change how fast it goes? Change to 2, right? How many times per second is it going to be moving? Bigger or smaller? Bigger, right? 5 times per second, 5 new numbers every second. So it's going to be jumping around a lot quicker. The random was 30 new numbers a second, if that helps, okay? If I wanted to move more, what do I change? The 100, process of elimination, right? There we go. So we put 500 there. So delete that, paste it, boom. Okay, so it's moving a lot more. It's loading still in the memory, there we go. It's moving a lot more per second, and it's moving bigger times in there too. So let's say I put this. How many times per second is it going to generate a new number? Once. Can I go any smaller? Can I? 0.5, right? Decimals. You can use 0.5, 0.25, whatever you need to, okay? As long as it's a number, like not negative. I don't think a negative will work there. But yeah, any number there. So you can just keep going further down. And what that does is just generates a new number every half of a number every second, however you want to look at that. So basically every 2 seconds it'll generate a new number. So there's the levels going up, there they go down, kind of bounce around, come there. That might be too much movement, right? So then I can just change that 500 to, let's say, 50. Mm-hmm. To not go in the negatives? Yes, there is. Good question. So this is where you get more into the math stuff. There are several different languages of expressions. Python is one of the languages. After Effects has nothing to do with Python. Okay. It uses JavaScript. And if you look up any JavaScript stuff, you can find these things. Basically, we need to do what's called an absolute. And if you remember this from math class 15 years ago or whenever you took it, Absolute takes any negative number and makes it positive, and it just keeps positive numbers positive, okay? So the way that it works inside of JavaScript is you would type math.absolute and then whatever value you have there, okay? So let me jump to my thing here. So I could do this. I could say, okay, the value of y, let's say it generated a negative 10 number. I could say now the value of y is going to equal math.absolute, the value of y, okay? And what that will do is it'll kind of filter it. If it's a negative number, it makes it positive, okay? The best way to do it is to just put all of this inside there. Now I say best because it's best for me. It might not be best for you. It might be too confusing to start nesting these expressions inside of other expressions. But that's what should do it. We will see if I am right. Oops, let's put that back to 0.5, yes. And 50 there. There we go. So we should never now be in that negative range. Okay? Now, let's say that, for instance, we're down here at the bottom of this. How do I make it, like, get bigger? Like, I wanted this to be, like, in this range right here. Think of it just like a number. Like, let's say, what was that? Plus 200, right? Just add. If you think about, like, if this is generating a number, let's say 50, I want the number to be 250. So I just add 200 to it. And that will get me more into that range. Now, 200 might be too much, but we'll see. This is also 50. I guess I'll just change it here. So let's type 200. Oops, I didn't do plus 200, did I? No, I didn't. Way over here. Plus 200. There we go. There we go. And so now we're in that higher up range, right? And so if we want it lower, we can bring it into the lower range. If I like the movement on it, but I want it to just be overall like smaller, I could even multiply. I could say times, come on, times 0.25. And that'll take whatever number it gives me and just shrink it down to 0.25, like that smaller, okay? Like I said, you're not going to be an expert at these. I just want you to be able to experiment with them, because you can see where this can be beneficial, right? Now, we're almost done with this one. We'll leave it like that. I think that's probably good enough like that. Now I need to make this a mask, so I'm going to go to my levels mask, which is right here, and I'm just going to make sure it's on top, and I'm going to take this and just do a track matte with the layer above it. Boom, there it is. Cool. So now we have one of these things locked in, ready to go, like that works, okay? So now I can take this, all four of these, and I'm going to duplicate it. So I'm going to turn on my layer below it. I'm going to lock it. Actually lock the other ones too. So I'm just going to duplicate, move these all together, and then just slide it over. Now what do we notice about the second one? It's different. Right? If we had animated this and then we duplicated it, they wouldn't be different. They would be exactly the same, and we have to go through and set different keyframes for all of those. Again, one of the benefits of doing this kind of thing. So then I'll just do that again. Duplicate, slide these up together, slide this over. Now, also as I animated the scale of this and not the position, that might have caused some issues if I were to animate position, because now I'm moving the position of each one of these over, okay? So I would do the same process for all of these. Just duplicate, duplicate, duplicate. All of these are different. I can come into any one of these. There's my shape layer. Hit E for expression twice. Oh, it's playing. That's why I didn't load. And then just change my numbers. So instead of plus 200, let's do plus 20. And then instead of 50, let's do 100 here. And instead of 0.5, let's do 1. Okay, so very easily I can still go back and edit those expressions for each individual one. So if I do want one that has a lot more movement in there, I can still create that. Okay. Now all of these changes that we're doing are right here still. There's my original comp, right? All my pieces together right inside here like this. That's the idea with this one, okay? So let's jump over to this and do the same thing. So let's go to UI Pieces. I'm going to grab my playlist outline. I'm going to double click my playlist. And then I'm just going to paste and scoot this over. Okay, I changed the size or the shape of it, but not the size, so it still works. I don't need my playlist on at the moment, so I'll turn that off. And then I just need to have something here happening, okay? Something in the background moving. I don't want that. I'll just type stuff, right? I'll get some stuff later, some actual text I would use. Fine to use placeholder text. Okay, I am typing stuff, it just wasn't updating. There we go. And then we'll shrink it down. We will find a font that works good. So let's say Helvetica. It's not Helvetica. That's Helvetica. What? All right, figure that out later. Just reset this to auto. Make sure you always check your settings because sometimes After Effects will remember what you did last time and it'll redo those same things. My text should be black. And there we go right here. Okay. So I need to basically have this thing go off the screen, come back on the screen, go off the screen, come back on the screen. I can do this a couple ways. One of these ways is under Distort, under Offset, way too far. I can use this, which is a offset, which shifts it off the screen. Now you can see that it goes obviously there, but that's where my background color here should allow me to basically make a mask that would then utilize that. So I'm going to copy my background color, drop it here, use this as a track map for my text, and now my text goes off there. Okay. Now I'm going to pull it off to this side here. I'm going to set a keyframe. Oops, let me go back to the beginning here. Set a keyframe. I'm going to scooch up to, I don't know, let's say 220. And then slide that off the screen there. I'm going to make sure that this looks good. All right, maybe that's a little bit too quick. Let's pull these over. Again, this is probably somewhere where I wouldn't have speed graph, that kind of thing. Typically, when you look at a display, it's just like cycling through, right? There we go. All right, so that feels like a good amount. The top one is the only one that will be doing that. All the other ones will be static, okay? So in order for me to have this loop, I'm going to then jump to expressions again. I could copy this expression, go to the very end of this, paste it, and do all that stuff. But there's another expression. After Effects, loop expressions. Okay, again, more stuff that you can kind of look up and see exactly what all of these do. But the idea with these, where was it? Is that if you have an animation that you've done, you can have After Effects automatically take those two keyframes, or however many you have, and cycle those two keyframes over and over and over again. One of the ways it does it is by doing a loop, meaning that it's going to go from A to B, and then jump back to A to B, then jump back A to B, and so on. Another way that it would do it is it would go A to B, and then animate back to A, then animate back to B, then animate back to A. So that's like what this is happening is a ping pong. Okay, this is doing a loop in. This is doing a loop out. Okay. So the inside of this, the start of the animation is looping, or before the animation is looping. This is animating after the animation. And then again, you can kind of look at all these different ones. Hey, look at that. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to alt-click on this. Even with keyframes, I can alt-click and add expressions on top of those. I'm going to go to my arrow here, and you'll see inside one of these menus, interpolation, no, where was it? Comp, footage, layer. there it is, under property, there it is, loop, loop out, loop in, loop out, duration. So I want to do loop out, and then I'm just going to turn that off, and then we'll see what happens. Okay. So now if I hit play, here it plays it once, and then it plays it again, and then it plays it again, and it plays again. So I don't have to reset those keyframes every time. It automatically does that for me. Now what we don't see happening is that it's actually jumping back to the beginning and playing it right from there. If I were to go into this, and let me get the exact phrasing. One of my issues that I always have is getting the exact name. Ping pong, yeah, that's it, all lowercase. Ping. Yep, that's right. So now when it plays, watch what happens. It's going to play this way, and then it's going to play that way. Again, something you might want to happen on some piece of animation. Not necessarily this one, it doesn't make sense for mine, but I like the way it was here. That makes sense, having it cycle like that. Okay, and again, that'll cycle pretty much forever. I can have it just keep going forever. And then once I have this stuff set up, so here's my outline, here's this, here's my outline, here's my background color. I would turn my playlist on, I would lock my layers below this, duplicate, move this below this actually. It's below it in here, and then just move that down, and then I would just take the expression off. So I would go to my expression here, Alt-click to get rid of the expression, and even grab probably the offset and just delete it. That way I just have the text there. And I can type in whatever I need to. If my text ends up being longer than this, because I have that mask, it should be fine. It'll just cover up that area. You know how they abbreviate it and you can't really read what it says anyway. Background color. Now, as I get more into this, sometimes you'll find it confusing, like what layers am I exactly supposed to click here? If you grab a section, like I know these are them, I go to the colors, and I give them this bright yellow color. Now it's obvious. Like, okay, those are the 4 that I'm going to duplicate, and then scoot down below the other one, and there it is. And then I would move this down, and then I would duplicate that, slide this underneath, and so on, going down the list. And eventually I'll come back and obviously change what those text pieces say. I'll turn off this playlist. And then again, all of this stuff will trickle into this area, where I would then go and delete these expressions on here too, so all of them aren't animating. Okay, so we haven't touched the 3D yet, but this is going to be the starting process. Think about how all your pieces are going to animate, and just start animating all these individual pieces. Regardless of what they are, you just get in there and start animating what it is. As we get further into this assignment, so next class I'll go over, here's a short lecture on different ways to animate these different pieces. Next class after that, here's another short way to do some stuff, and then I'll get into more of the 3D. Okay? It's all about just trying to figure out how you want to animate all of these individual things moving around on your screen, if they do move around. These little things down here aren't going to move. I may actually eliminate them because I don't like them. This dial over here probably will move, so I will have that kind of turning at some point. These tabs will move. I'll have that turning as well. Okay? So that will be your process to go forward on this. Get it drawn, get into After Effects, then just start animating how all these things are going to move. One more thing before I do let you play. When you look at your pivots for things, one of the things I showed before was, where is it at? There it is. Okay, so something like this, where I have all of these pieces here. Let me get rid of this, like whatever this is in the middle. If I'm going to animate all of these pieces individually, I have to make sure that my pivots are in the correct spot. So like this piece, this piece, this piece, that piece, that piece, and that piece. If I wanted to rotate all of those pieces around, if I just go to my rotate tool, I'm pretending this is After Effects, and I start rotating it, what we'll find is that it's not going to line up perfectly as it goes. And you'll actually see there's kind of like a wobble to it. Okay, because these pieces aren't symmetrical all the way around, you do get this like weird little wobbly thing happening. So typically if I have something like that, I will typically have another shape that I'm using to animate. So I would have another shape that's kind of like out here with no fill and no stroke. Okay, so you can see how this circle is lined up perfectly with that. These are now moved, I have to fix that. But then I can take all of these little pieces, parent them to the bigger piece, and then just rotate that bigger piece around. Okay, so you may have to do stuff like that, just kind of get creative with it. But just be aware of that as you're animating your stuff. You want to test it, you want to view it, you want to make sure it looks good. Okay, you can think about how things are going to load, how things are going to move, how it's going to flow around your screen. Some things will be straight up animated. Some things will be keyframed with expressions. Some will just be expressions. Some will be effects. We'll get more and more into these as we go. Cool? No questions?